Hello and welcome to the As Yet Unnamed podcast. I am your host, Ian Barstow. In today's episode, we speak to photographer and filmmaker Edmond Terakopian. Edmond has worked for all major newspapers and agencies, as well as getting the World Press Photo Award and also the British Press Awards Photographer of the Year title. We are in very good company. It's a really interesting conversation. We discuss a lot of different subjects, and also we discuss Edmond's sort of how he got started in photography, his first camera, all of that. It's a really good conversation and I hope you're going to enjoy it. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, then hello. Thank you very much for downloading this episode. We've got lots of previous episodes as well, so why not click on follow and subscribe on your podcast app and you can listen to all of them way back for about 6 or 7 episodes-ish, depending on when this one goes out. I'll work that one out later. If you're watching us on YouTube, then again, thank you very much. Click on comment, like and share, and also why not drop me a line on Twitter? The podcast has its own Twitter account, As Yet Unnamed Pod, P-O-D, and I am on Twitter as well, at IanHRP. If you want to find out more about the podcast, then you can go over to dracottphotography.co.uk/podcast. It's a work in progress still, and it's going to be built up, slowly but surely, but there's all the information that you need on there. So without further ado, let's get on with the podcast episode, and I hope you enjoy this interview. It is a really interesting conversation, and I will speak to you again at the end of the show. Enjoy! Hello, welcome to the podcast, and welcome to Edmond. Hello, good morning, Edmond. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. Good to virtually meet you. This lockdown situation, it's always nice to see a new face and hear a new voice and have a conversation. So yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So you're in? Are you based in London? Aren't you?
I am. Yeah, West London. I live in Ealing.
With lockdown, are you on your own at the moment? Are you? Have you got family with you, or?
No, I'm on my own. My girlfriend lives in Italy, so sadly at the moment we're sort of apart and haven't seen us since the middle of February because of course travel restrictions and so on. Rightly so, I hasten to add. So yeah, on my lonesome, virtual connections, my cameras and stuff. But of course, being a photojournalist, I'm out and about now and again, sort of working on stories to do with COVID-19, so I'm not completely sort of stuck inside, but yeah.
So are you finding your work, because obviously I presume your commission work and your sort of the work you do in the theatres and that side of it has stopped. So are you mainly now concentrating on your going out and shooting, as you said, for the COVID-19 story that is massive at the moment? Yeah,
it's my entire diary of bookings got cancelled, every single one, and of course as a business that's not very good news. So anything that involved any kind of social interaction, stuff to do with a photography show up in Birmingham and so on, got cancelled. But that has left some of the photojournalistic work, and I'm working on a longer term kind of essay on coronavirus and sort of daily life in London. So I've been shooting bits and pieces on that, sort of to put together a sort of a photo essay for the magazine market. So that's what I've been shooting. But yeah, normal kind of normal work is completely dried up totally. So twiddling of thumbs and sort of worried expressions on my brow kind of have been.
My wallet was very happy when the photo show got cancelled. Without getting too political, in the current situation that we've got, have you been driving to castles to test your eyesight recently?
I haven't. No, I've decided to be sensible and take DVLA advice and not drive a car when visually impaired. And I certainly wouldn't dream of putting any loved ones in the car if I had to drive the car visually impaired. So yeah, these are very, very strange times. And And sort of, on a slightly more serious note, I do see this sort of now and again on social media and sort of, posts from friends or sort of follows in photography groups and stuff where people say, I don't want to be political, or let's not get political, and so on. But the reality of our lives is that we all need to care about politics, because this is the one and only thing that affects us completely. And when people sort of, switch off from following politics or trying to do a little bit of research before voting or even getting up and voting, we get a situation where we are in now in this country. I would argue the same applies to the United States, where people, because of apathy or just wanting to believe their own beliefs as opposed to look at reality, sort of vote a certain way or don't vote at all, or get involved in stuff, and this ends up ruining lives. We're in a situation in this country where people are in charge of dealing with a pandemic that's not a political thing. It's a biological issue, and it's a real issue. You can't spin it, you can't cover it, you can't camouflage it. And if you're not dealing with it properly, and you're sort of doing things that 99% of countries around the world, including those who have direct experience from these airborne viruses, and you're doing stuff against what everyone else is doing, you end up costing extra tens of thousands of lives. This is important, when we look at these statistics, they're becoming bigger and bigger every day. And yes, some people are just seeing a number, but if you bring that onto a personal level, each one of those deaths has a ripple effect. That person is someone's daughter or son or husband or wife or uncle or nephew or whatever. And these are sort of lives, and on a ripple effect, multiple lives that sort of get ruined. And of course, some people will die. It's the sad nature of COVID-19, but there's a lot of people that could have been saved that weren't saved because of stupid decisions like herd immunity without a vaccination in place. Herd immunity works, but it needs a vaccination to help protect the vulnerable in society. And anyway, this government's stance on things has been very strange. And I don't mean this in a party political way. I think as responsible people, we all have our own kind of ideals. But if you're, for example, a Liberal Democrat voter day in, day out, if one general election you see that the political platform is skewed, or the people promising to deliver it are no way capable of delivering it, maybe it's a good idea to look at Labour, maybe it's a good idea to look at Conservatives, and the same goes, of course, in every other way. Perhaps one day the monster raving loonies will be the most kind of clued up with the best political platform and the brightest people.
The current situation, I wouldn't put that as too far out of reality. I have to say.
Exactly.
It's as we record this, we are just towards the end of May 2020, and we're just they're just starting to open up shops, and in a couple of weeks' time, non-essential shops will be able to open up. And then you go back, and I've just on Twitter before we started this interview, and I see pictures of crowded beaches and all of that, and you just think, really? Have we not gone through what we've gone through? And now we're people are just sort of going, oh, okay, we can go out now and do what we want. And it's a very scary time at the moment. I don't think people quite grasp. And I think one of the issues is the number. Every day the number comes out and it's another 120 people, 300 people that have sadly passed away. And it is just a number. And I think that might be because we're not seeing a lot of the human cost. We're not seeing. So yeah, so on the last night on the news on the BBC, there was a report. They're doing a whole series where they focus on the hospital and they focus on the doctors and the nurses, and you see in their face that complete, utter drained nature and that shock, and then you see the human lives and the human people. We're not seeing that photography wise. I don't think we're not concentrating on that in the press, in the magazines. I'm not seeing photos that strike home what we're going through. Do you think that's missing in this current story?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. We're not seeing it. We're not seeing the real face of coronavirus at all in any media in this country, and that's by design. Um, Again, it's a political issue, partly because the NHS has been ravaged bare by years and years and years of underfunding. We've got to a situation where the most important people in this country are being sent into buildings which are virally loaded with a killing virus, and they don't have PPE. They don't have personal protection equipment. And to realize that in a hospital, PPE is, apart from tongue depressors, probably the cheapest item the hospital has. This is the ridiculousness of it, you know. N95 masks, when bought in bulk by, you know, health authorities like the NHS, cost a couple of pounds. I mean, it's ridiculous. And, you know, in the early days when some nurses and doctors kind of let things slip before they were reprimanded, you know, we heard of situations where people were being seriously told to hold your breath when you go into the room, treat the patients, and then come out again. And how crazy is that? It's ridiculous. And, you know, the situations happened elsewhere. In America, I think it was 8 nurses got fired because they refused to work without face masks. I mean, how ridiculous is it when we let stuff like this happen? So coming back to this country, I think this is all by design. You know, the NHS has been told not to talk to the media, not to grant access. And there's been a couple of instances where access has been given, but it's been so PR polished beyond belief that it looks almost like an advert. It's not journalism. And this isn't the fault of the journalists. I'm not sort of accusing the BBC or the Guardian, which are two pieces that come to mind immediately, of not doing their job. But when you're given access and you've got PR managers making sure the ward is sparkling, everyone's got state-of-the-art PPE on and so on, you're not seeing the reality sort of in other rooms or in other corridors. I think the only work that has come to show what's happening is Stuart Franklin of Magnum Photos spent I think it was a week in 2 hospitals, and this was in the Sunday Times magazine, and I believe the Guardian ran it as well, but I haven't seen it in the Guardian yet. But that's one thing in an entire country dying from coronavirus, and that's ridiculous. You know, if you look at the work that came out of Bergamo in Italy, it was one of the Italian magazines ran a huge photo essay on this. Even the hardest of photojournalists or anyone else who's sort of hardened to life would have looked at that and started crying. I had tears running down my face just looking through the pictures. I couldn't read the text because it was in Italian, but the photographs were so powerful, they were so emotional, that it absolutely shook me beyond belief. And we're not seeing that in this country. And the result of that is that people kind of half don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
Exactly as you say, you know, we saw pictures of holiday makers on the beach rubbing past each other as they were walking up and down the stairs, setting up their sort of beach blankets and so on right next to each other. And it's ridiculous. You know, if you're there for a few hours and the wind is favorable, you're going to get coronavirus, or you're going to give someone else coronavirus.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And one of the biggest dangers with this particular virus is that because we don't see results immediately, and it takes a couple of weeks for things to happen, this sort of delayed reaction of a 2-week period, it means people don't realize what's going on. Every action we take now will have a consequence 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And that one person or two people we infect will then infect 4 people, will then infect 16 people, and so on and so on and so on. And it's crazy. It's so stupid. We're in a situation where we're spoilt with things to do at home. Most people don't want to stay at home. I completely understand. Me, I'm one of these people. We've got the internet. We've got TV, we've got radio, we've got Netflix, we've got, WhatsApp and Skype, and we can keep in touch with people and see people. We're sort of behaving like, it's the biggest sacrifice ever. And actually it isn't. When you read or see pictures of someone gasping for air and dying, when you hear from nurses telling you how scared their patients were, because people are saying, oh, it's a peaceful death. It's not.
No.
Imagine not being able to breathe. It's so simple. If everyone, hearing this podcast holds their breath for over a minute and then keeps trying to hold their breath, that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
And there's no coming back. There is no taking a gasp. And you're on your own because of lockdown. Again, rightly so, because if a relative comes into that situation, they will then likely get infected and pass that on to their circle of people. And the government is doing the country a disservice by stopping freedom of press, by stopping us from showing the people this is the reality. Yes, government, you screwed up with PPE. Yes, government, you screwed up with ventilators. You didn't accept EU help because you're running towards Brexit. And for a government not to realize that politics is politics, saving lives is saving lives. There's a priority. You have to prioritize stuff. Yes, you promised Brexit. Fine. Go ahead with it. Do it properly. But before that, you've got to save people's lives. We're in a situation where we've got the highest deaths in Europe. And 4 or 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago probably now, the Prime Minister stood there very proudly, like it's something to be proud of, saying, in 4 weeks we'll be just as bad as Italy.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
But carry on.
Yeah.
Well, Prime Minister, what are you going to do about it? Oh, nothing. Just be sensible. Don't go to the pub. But the pubs are open. Yes, but you don't have to go. Send your children to school.
Don't go to Cheltenham or Liverpool football clubs and concerts and all of those mass events they had 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the horse races, now that people have sort of done some track and tracing, has I can't remember the figures now, but just that one meet has caused massive amount of deaths.
Yeah.
And this is all down to incompetence. And it's not a case of we're in a situation where we were the first to get this, so it's unknown territory. Because, of course, in that situation, you take your best sort of educated guesses and sort of, trial and error and see how it goes and be as intelligent as possible and listen to the scientists who aren't being bullied by the government's chief advisor. And you go forward. But that wasn't a situation. We're in a situation where China learnt lessons, Singapore, Taiwan, all of these countries learnt lessons on how to cope with this. All we had to do was follow their lead. It's not that complicated. No. When, and I don't mean this in any disrespectful way, but when we've got a country like Greece, who isn't economically as stable as some of the other countries in Europe, completely locks down and realizes the seriousness of this situation and controls it beyond even a model way of dealing with stuff like this, and comes up with the results that they did. Why couldn't we do that? We've got more resources than they have. And we consider ourselves the most superior country in Europe. We don't need the EU. We're Great Britain, we're the United Kingdom. But we have one of the economically weaker countries showing us up. Bravo, Greece. I mean, brilliant. If only we had a government that was as caring for its population as Greece, as the Greek government is,
It feels like we're moving more and more towards the American style of politics than we have for the last 10 years. As that sort of fake media, bad press, you don't agree with me, you've got to be bad, all that sort of stuff. It's just we're drifting down that path quite quickly. Actually, it's we're not just drifting; we sort of seem to be running fastly towards it. It's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to expand on that, if you don't mind, it's if you look at, and again, none of what I say is party political. It's to do with the right thing and doing things correctly. I myself, I've been mainly a Labour voter during my life, but I have also voted for the Conservative Party because on certain general elections, the party I would normally vote for hasn't been up to scratch, hasn't had the right policies in place, and hasn't had the right people to put the policies into action. So what I'm saying is about life and society. As a photojournalist, you're very privileged in that you get to spend time with people in the full spectrum of life, from the poorest and most down and out to the ultra mega rich, from the royal family to tramps on the street or homeless people on the Strand, or the whole spectrum of life. And this, I think, gives us maybe a sort of a wider outlook on what's important, what's not important. When you go to an earthquake region, or you see a famine, or you go to war, it really helps you evaluate what's important and what's not. And coming back to the political scene, if you look at the Brexit campaign, it was an identical model of Trump's presidential campaign. Yeah. I mean, identical. And the people behind it already, we know that Russia was massively involved. Cambridge Analytica was massively involved. And I mean, no wonder we're heading towards the same way, because we've got the same architects probably behind the scenes managing both things. It's a hell of a coincidence to be so identical, and time-wise as well so identical. And that's the problem. We've got people sort of believing what bots are putting out on Twitter. I mean, it's ridiculous. I remember, when I was younger, wondering why Americans hated commies so much, communism so much. It was like, well, it's an ideology. Why do you want to kill people who have that ideology? I could never understand this kind of thing. But now we've got the same people in the same country following everything Putin wants to put forward and believing it because it plays to their own personal prejudices and racism and stupidity. It's ignorance. That's what it is. And, we're in a situation where you can pick up a smartphone, you can switch on your laptop, and you can read anything you want. But so many of us choose to only find, and we will actively waste time finding stuff that will help prop up our own prejudices.
Yeah.
Be that racism, ultra right wing, ultra left wing, or whatever. It works all around. And that's stupid, because we can read proper sources. Yes, I might think the Earth is flat. I'm pretty sure it is, because when I'm looking out there, it's flat. It's not curved. And, when I'm walking, I feel like I'm walking in a straight line. So this is what my mind tells me, right?
Yeah.
As an example. But there are people who are much more learned than me, who have gone to university and dedicated decades of their life researching this, or who've gone into space and looked back and taken photos and experienced it, and they tell me the Earth is round. Okay, well, my limited vision from here sees the Earth as being flat, but surely I'd be an idiot to argue with these people, argue with the photographs, the films, the videos, everything, and say, well, no. But the moon is round. Yeah, but that's a different planet. There's no one on the moon. They all fell off because it was circular, Of course, I don't believe the Earth is flat, but I'm just trying to illustrate a point, Yes,
but most people that believe the Earth is flat will probably also believe that 5G is responsible for coronavirus, and that it's that whole conspiracy theory and vaccines are dangerous and all of that. I'm generalizing, but it does all seem to be people that believe in one will believe in the other, and it just propagates itself. And it is so easy to spread on social media. It is so easy for people, as you said, that don't read. If I see something, so when the 5G things first came out, I thought, my instinct was, no, that's a load of rubbish. But I thought, well, I'll just have a quick look. So you just do a quick search and you go onto the Ofcom site and all of these other ones. And again, like, no, we've done all this research, peer reviewed. there's no danger. But you can't get people that believe in that 5G conspiracy to actually, they don't seem to want to listen to your argument. They just want to believe what they believe. And I think the social media side of that is propagating that massively around the world.
Oh, hugely. But the real shame of all of this is that these same people don't realize they're being manipulated for a completely different reason, and they're running head over heels into this and helping the agenda. And what the agenda is it is the far right who want less regulation, who want to deregulate things. And the easiest way of doing this is convince a bunch of people that vaccines are killing your children or giving them mental disabilities and so on. Start up an anti-vaxxer group who doesn't want it to be compulsory to be vaccinated for the sake of your child. I mean, how ridiculous is that you're willing to kill your children? And with deregulation of vaccines comes deregulation of other things, which means that big business can get away with more stuff. More money can be made by that sort of, 0.5% of dodgy people on the planet who rake in trillions of dollars whilst we've got people dying of hunger, whilst we've got nurses going into rooms virally loaded with COVID-19 without a £2 face mask. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
But, Mr. X, Y, and Z has got 3 super yachts and a private plane and never has to worry about anything. There's so much disparity, and of course there will always be some disparity, but it's getting more and more and more and more, because the very same people who suffer don't want to face a reality and figure out why they're suffering and make better, but they want to believe the billionaire telling them that he's one of them. And don't listen to the scientists, don't listen to the professors, don't listen to anyone intelligent. I'm man of the people, listen to me, I've got a red cap, and I use my hands in such a way that it's hypnotic, and simple people just believe everything. It's ridiculous. I'm so thankful Twitter has started putting a fact-checking symbol next to Trump's tweets now. So, but of course, how many people will click that, I logo to find out the reality between postal ballots and so on? We really have, this is the problem, we really have no excuse for not finding out the truth, because we don't even have to go to the library to read newspapers and books or go and buy a newspaper. Just go online. Read, for example, The Times is a right-leaning paper, The Guardian is a left-leaning paper, right? Read both of them. They're both quality newspapers. They both have a take on things, but they're both quality papers. Read both, and then that way you get a completely balanced view. If you want to read the Mail, fine, read the Mail. But also read the Mirror. Then that way you get more of a balanced view. We're only talking about a few minutes of time. Stop watching stupid reality shows and just spend a little bit of time safeguarding your future and the future of people who are close to you.
What was your first camera that you had? When did you suddenly discover that you love photography and it's something you want to pursue as a career?
So there's 2 answers to that question. First camera I had, and I realized I loved photography, or I liked taking pictures, which would be more accurate for that period of time, was discovering the family's Kodak 110 cartridge camera, which took flash cubes on top, And for some reason, I just really liked it. I think part of it was probably just a clicking sound. I was 8, 7 to 8, that kind of time frame. But it was just nice looking through the hole and looking at stuff and taking pictures. And I used to just find interest in weird things, shapes and shadows and chairs that are cut, with the sunlight and stuff like that, casting shadows and so on. But when I got to about 14, 15, I really started to look at photographs, and then I began to understand photography a little bit more. And an older brother of a friend of mine at the time, he was massively into photography. He was a few years older than me, and really talented amateur photography. I used to love seeing his pictures. When I went to see my mate, I'd also sort of make sure I popped into his room and we'd have a chat and look at his pictures, and I'd ask him how he made this effect or how that worked and so on. And then I sort of decided that for my 16th birthday I would save up my pocket money and buy an SLR. So I did, and my friend, his name's Vaha, and he kind of said, look, I'll help you choose something. And I wanted to buy a Zenit from Argos because that was the cheapest thing. There was a Praktica or a Zenit from Argos, and they were both sort of cheap alternatives, and I decided Zenit was the way to go. And he said, no, don't. Just keep saving a little bit more and I'll find you a good deal on a Nikon. And true to his word, he found a shop which has since closed down called Techno in High Street, Kensington, had a very, very good deal on a Nikon EM, which was a bottom-of-the-range Nikon SLR. And I saved a bit more, and we got on the tube and went and bought this camera. So that was my first camera, first proper camera.
And did you stick with Nikon from sort of was, because I find sometimes that the first camera someone has, the first proper camera, I hate using the term proper camera, but the first DSLR that someone picks up, that brand, probably because you invest a lot in the lenses as well, but also you tend to stick with a brand. So did you use Nikons throughout your career, or did you chop and change until you found the one that was right for you?
Yeah, I chopped and changed. I mean, it's weirdly, as you were asking this question, I kind of thought actually it's similar to my comments about politics. You got to see what's on offer and what works for you, and make a decision, because just to fly one flag, just for the sake of flying one flag, it's a bit silly, isn't it? But no, I chopped and changed, and initially I wanted to stick with Nikon because back then Nikon did make an amazing array of cameras. I'm not saying they don't do now, but certainly back then all the biggest names in photojournalism, press photography in particular, shot Nikons. Nikon FM2s, Nikon F3s. The generation before would use Nikon F2s, built like a tank. You could use it for hammering in nails, if you couldn't find your hammer, and it would still work, that kind of stuff. And of course, very good lenses. But so I had my Nikon EM, and I bought a because I was 16. It's literally pocket money, and I used to have summer jobs and Christmas jobs, and sort of save my money and buy stuff. So I got a Tamron zoom lens for it as well, a 70 to 210. That was the length back in those days. And then a friend of mine had a Canon F1, which is the top of the range professional camera, but the older model. And he had a 55mm 1.2, which was a sort of a pro specification lens. The lens I had on my £150 Nikon EM kit was a 51A, and it was the budget version.
Yeah.
Which was still ample for me, but I kind of thought, oh wow, 1.2 and pro camera and pro lens and fully mechanical, fully manual as well. My Nikon was aperture priority only. So he made a good offer, and I sort of snapped it up. So I had a Nikon with a 50 and a Canon with a 55, and then a Tamron zoom. So that was my outfit, and eventually I started working with that as an outfit for local paper. But of course, very soon every penny I made went into buying sort of other lenses. And back then I actually went down the Canon route after that, and I started sort of collecting more lenses and other bodies, and a new F1, which was the F1N, Canon T90, which was revolutionary for its day, and to this day the DNA that Canon put in the T90, which was well ahead of its time, still continues in all the EOS range of DSLRs. So yeah, that's where I was for years. But I did always still really like Nikon. So when the change to AF came about, it was a case of dropping every single thing I had on built up on Canon, and buy an EOS camera which had an EF mount, so a totally different mount to the FD mount, which is what I used before, and be 100% reliant on batteries, because AF cameras of course need batteries to work.
Yeah.
Or look at the Nikon option, which gave you AF, but same lens mount, and then you could have a mechanical camera using those lenses as well. And back then, because this technology was so new, it was this case of, and it was unfounded, but it was this case of, and a lot of us thought this way, do I want to be reliant on batteries? What if I run out of batteries, can't buy batteries and stuff like that? This is before, rechargeable internal lithium ion and stuff like that. So I at that point I swapped over to Nikon again and bought an F90, which was an AF SLR, and an FM2, which was 100% mechanical SLR. And then this way I had best of both worlds and could chop and change lenses. AF lenses fitted just fine, and manual lenses fitted on the AF body just fine. So that's kind of the route I took.
What was your first digital camera? Because obviously digital was it took a while. It's been around longer than people think it's been around, the digital cameras, but it took a while for it to overtake the mirror cameras and the standard sort of the non-digital ones. What was your first digital sensor camera? Can you remember?
Yeah, I can. It's and it was quite a big deal, and a big deal in a negative way. So the paper I was at the time, it was a local paper called the Harrow Observer. Fantastic paper to work on. And I made friends and relationships with colleagues that I still keep to this day. So we got called in because Kodak had told us they had a campus in Harrow. So they said, we want to collaborate with you, and we'd like to provide the photographic department with 3 DSLRs. And Kodak at the time, what they were doing was they were basically buying Canon and Nikon cameras at retail, taking the back and the bottom off it, and then bolting on their own digital back and bottom end, because Nikon and Canon didn't want to collaborate with them at the time, because number one, they couldn't see the value in digital, and they didn't want to also they didn't want to sabotage their own sales. So that's what Kodak were doing, and the top of the range camera was 20 grand, and then there was a 10 grand model, and then there was the budget 4 grand model. And of course, we got the budget 4 grand model, which is called a DCS 315, DCS 315. And this was built around a Nikon Pro Near body, which was an amateur, I think it was APS-C. What was the film called? Is it APS? The cartridge film that you pushed in. It was smaller than 35mm. So that was the body, which meant it wasn't a full frame anyway. But the magnification was 2.7, if I remember. 2.7, right?
Blimey.
Problem number 1.
Yes.
Problem number 2, it had 100, 200, and 400 ASA. That's it. Which is a news photographer, when you have to photograph, for example, floodlit football at local football level grounds in the middle of winter when it's pitch black, and 6,400 ASA isn't fast enough. 400 ASA is a challenge, let's just say. The third problem with it was the motor drive on it was 1.5 frames a second. I could literally manually wind my Leica or my Nikon faster than the motor drive in this Kodak DCS 315. So, and the batteries were terrible. I used to take 6 AA batteries that would drain without any kind of notice. The hard drive was a spinning PCMCIA hard drive. It wasn't a memory card, it was a hard drive, this kind of big, that you'd slot in. And because it was a spinning drive, if you knocked it, it could very easily break. So, you're a news photographer covering demonstrations and running around and stuff. And it's, it was a challenging beginning. And I remember for probably a good 2 years after we got these digital cameras, if the story I was working on was a feature story and wasn't breaking news, I would still shoot on film, because at least I had the time to get it processed and scanned and so on. And if it was breaking news, then it had to be the Kodak. But the other problem with that was also the laptops at the time were not really up to it. I had a Sony at one stage, at the early days. I had a Sony, and from switching on, fully charged, from switching on to it switching off because the battery drained, was 35 minutes, right? So in 35 minutes, you had to download your TIFF files from the camera. That's what it shot. The raw files were in TIFF mode. And they were, although the camera was a 1 megapixel, they were still big files. You know, bigger than the JPEGs we get nowadays. So you had, and I can't even remember what the interface was. This is even pre-USB. So you had to download the pictures off the PCMCIA card, edit, process, caption, and send in a 35-minute window. And when I say send, we didn't even have GPRS back in those days. Forget 5G, 4G, 3G, or Wi-Fi, abundant. It was a case of walking around with a Nokia phone cabled to the laptop, moving it around and hope you sort of got a few bars and then send it. But more often than not, I'd sort of we'd all do this. We'd walk into news agents and ask to borrow their landline and give them a fiver and sort of swear blindly that it's a local London phone number we're calling, not some sort of foreign number that's going to cost them a ton of money. So yeah, interesting days. That beginning was an interesting time.
So you are a press photographer. You're a photojournalist. What was your first publicated photo that you had, sort of newspaper wise?
Publicated?
Published photo. Even publicated, that's published photo.
sorry My first published photos were at the age of about 17, and from a storm. Back in '87, there was a huge storm. I don't know if you remember it.
Just the hurricane. There's not going to be there's no hurricane coming. Don't worry about it. That one.
Yeah.
Yes.
The famous Michael Fish, the weatherman, got it completely wrong. Hurricane. Yeah, and I was still in high school, and I'd had my Nikon EM now for about a year at this stage, and back then my aim was to become a surgeon. That's where my career was going. Still at that stage, I was doing chemistry and biology A levels, sort of gearing up to apply to medical school, and I was very interested in surgery specifically. So that was kind of my goal. But anyway, because of my camera, I'd go to the library every 2 weeks and just take out a stack of books, and just devour them every 2 weeks. Go back and get a different stack of books from the library. And in the beginning, it was technique, how to set the exposure correctly and all of this, focusing tricks and whatever. But, the real joy comes in once you've mastered this sort of the technical aspect and you start looking at aesthetics and composition and understanding of light and so on, and looking at photography. And I started looking at a huge, wide range of photography because I loved it all. Everything from still life flower pictures by Mapplethorpe to photographs from Magnum Photos photographers, pictures from World War II and Vietnam and so on, and just everything, landscape pictures, Ansel Adams' work, Avedon's fashion work, and it was just brilliant. But I started to gravitate towards photojournalism, and I realized these are the images that speak to me the loudest. These are the images that grab me by the heart and grab my mind and open my mind to stuff. So that's the direction I went. And there was one particular book. It was called In Our Time by Magnum Photos. And if you haven't seen it, I thoroughly recommend this book. It's brilliant. It's like an encyclopedia of several decades of the best photojournalism in the world, all by Magnum Photos photographers. So this thing of photojournalism, without me actually realizing it, started to embed itself in my psyche. It sort of started trickling down. And so going forward to when I was 17, my radio alarm clock went off. And, oh, God, morning, have to go to school. So I started getting up, and it was Capital Radio, Dr. Fox on the radio. Pardon me. So Dr. Fox came on, and hey, good news, kids, all the schools are shut because there's been a massive hurricane and trees have fallen everywhere, so don't bother about getting up and going to school. And I thought, great. And I fell straight back into bed, and about a nanosecond later sat bolt upright because my brain processed hurricane, trees, there must be photos to be had here.
Yeah.
And without even getting out of my PJs, I started wearing clothes on top, didn't bother washing up, brushing teeth or anything. I grabbed my little camera bag, tiny little bag with my Nikon EM in it, and I ran downstairs. And my mum sort of said, "Oh, don't worry, the schools are closed because there's been a storm." And I said, "Don't worry, I've got photos to take." And I ran out the house, and she was screaming, "Where are you going? Come back, it's dangerous." And I just went out, and on foot I started, even the road adjacent to ours had a huge tree that had fallen on a car and completely flattened it. And I had a few rolls of black and white film, and I just started photographing stuff, and went to the local park and took some amazing pictures there of sort of uprooted trees, sort of surreal landscapes and stuff, and squashed cars, caved in roofs and all sorts of stuff. And I have no idea where I got this sort of energy or this thought from, and immediately jumped on a bus and went to the Ealing Gazette, which was a local paper. And I asked the receptionist to see the picture desk, and she sort of took a look at this child, saying, "Please, miss, can I see the picture editor?" And kind of took pity and called the picture editor, a guy called Stan James. And just as I was going in to see him, his photographers were going out to start shooting the story. So I'd already shot it and got to the paper before the staff photographers at the paper were going out. So he was kind of amused by that. And I gave him my 4 rolls of film, and said, "Okay, well, we'll process this and we'll be in touch." And he kind of didn't really think there'd be anything on there. And then the paper came out. It was a weekly paper, and they'd put together a special supplement for the storm because Ealing was one of the hardest hit boroughs because of the number of trees and parks and stuff in the area. And they'd put together this 14-page supplement, and almost on every page I had a photograph, and I was over the moon. This was my first publication. Page after page, almost every single page had my work on it. But then my heart sank because then I saw the photo. There was one photo credit saying photographs by, and it was their photographers, Tim Merry, Mark Keogh, who've both gone on to Fleet Street. I can't remember who else was there. There was 1 or 2 other people there. And no Edmond Terakopian. And I was gutted. I was so upset because, these were my pictures. And then when I went to see him to pick up my process films, I kind of said, so you like the pictures, is there any payment? And he kind of looked at me and went, yeah, you can have 4 rolls of film. And he gave me 4 rolls of film back. And that was my first sort of publication and first payment. And
it's a good first exposure into press photography, though, isn't it? In
a
full-out supplement special.
Yeah, it was.
Do you think now, because obviously local newspaper, local news in general is very, we don't really, it feels like we don't have, when I was younger, we used to have, in Birmingham, we used to have the Evening Mail, and it was a massive paper, and it had really good journalism, breaking stories, all of that information on there. We don't seem to have the daily local newspapers as much, unless you're in London with sort of the Evening Standard, etc. But we also don't have the weekly newspapers anymore. I can't remember the last time I've had a weekly local newspaper come through the door. Do you think that's a sort of a bad? It's a loss to journalists. It's a loss to photojournalists because you don't have that stomping ground to build your skill on anymore. Well, you don't seem to anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest loss is to the community. That's the biggest loss. Because, every story has let's call it a level.
Yeah. Some
stories will concern the nation. Some stories will concern the world. Other stories are so local that they're still important, but are of no interest to, for example, anyone outside Birmingham or anyone outside of Ealing, and that's why it's important to have these different sort of levels of publications. so they can carry the relevant stories. The most heartbreaking and strongest illustration of this is the Grenfell Tower fire. The Residents Association for that building for years was complaining about this flammable cladding on their building.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a London-wide story, so as far as I know, the Standard didn't cover it. And they certainly didn't cover it in the local paper. Their local paper, the Kensington and Chelsea Times, back in the day used to be a very good local paper. But because people stopped reading it, advertising got less and less, funding got less and less, it turned into a sort of a rag that would carry a few sort of house adverts and car adverts and sort of rehash press releases without any actual journalists working there to sort of dig up stories or research stories, analyze stories and so on. So, you know, the council and the government got away with this cheap cladding to make it look beautiful to the sort of more affluent people living in the area who could see this monstrosity in inverted commas of a tower block. And of course we know what happened. You know, the thing caught fire and so many people sadly lost their lives. If the local paper if the Kensington, and I can say this as a fact because I know how good the paper used to be back when local newspapers had funding and proper journalists on them, photojournalists and reporters. The Residents Association wouldn't have got away with that. That cladding would have come down within months and those people would still be alive.
Yeah.
And the homeless people who were still homeless after the fire wouldn't be homeless. And this is a perfect illustration of this. You know, back in the Ealing Gazette and then the Harrow Observer, which was my second local paper, we made ministers resign their posts because of stories we did. And this isn't because we hated ministers or some nonsense tabloid thing. It was because when people are in public office or they're in business or education or in any post of responsibility, they have to answer to the public. They have to answer to the press, and the press are an extension of the public. We're the eyes and ears of our readership, our country. And if people are doing wrong, it's our job and it's our duty to investigate and to show people. Also the inverse, if someone's doing amazing work, people should know about it or learn about it. So, you know, even on our small papers, we made national level changes to society because we felt someone's doing wrong. We would investigate it, make sure it held up, and then publish it, and this would change. We made changes in hospitals and so on. We had a story I worked on which was heartbreaking, where the one ward in one of the hospitals had run out of beds, so the geriatric unit had their elderly patients sleeping on the floor. I mean on mattresses, but they were sleeping on the floor. 12, 14 of them in a room. It was like a scene you might imagine in a slum in India or somewhere like that, not in West London. And I sort of snuck in there, hidden camera, Leica under my coat, and took a few pictures, and it broke my heart. As I took this one picture, this sort of elderly guy sort of started raising his hand just to get my attention, but it looked like he was almost asking for help or food or something. I think he was asking for help on reflection. And of course we published that, and you know, a week later that was put right. And this is the duty of a local paper. Stuff like this. So you know, first of all, society suffers when local papers die out. And also, you know, going back to the politics thing, you know, which councillor should I vote for locally? And this is a local issue. You know, even if you're, for example, a Labour voter, but for your borough, a Green Party councillor is going to be better for society within those boundaries, then maybe that's the intelligent thing to do. You know, and this you only find out on local level, and you need to read analytical pieces, not sort of propaganda pushed in through your letterbox or propaganda on Twitter from X, Y, and Z politician. And again, this is something that local papers used to bring, which sadly have died out. But to get back on point to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. photographers and journalists now don't have that sort of middle ground after. I mean, I personally didn't do a degree. I got rejected when I applied to do a photography degree. But that sort of after education, before going up to national level or international level, that local level was so important.
Yeah.
Because you would cut your teeth, working on real stories, learning tips and tricks, and understanding how to speak with people. It's there's such a wide variety of work journalists do, and sometimes you have to go and speak to a grieving mother who's just lost their child, and quite often you're with someone on the worst day of their lives, and you can't learn how to do that. It's not a university lesson or a college lesson of this is what you're saying, this is how. It's not. This is real life experience that you only gain by living, by seeing, by feeling, by shedding a tear, by understanding, and stuff like this. You slowly begin to understand, and you slowly begin to understand about human nature and how to talk to people, and how not to be intrusive, how to be helpful, how to be, all of this kind of stuff. So it was a very, very important learning sort of level for me. And also it went much more, so many local papers, some local papers always remained as, to use a sort of slang, the local rag. But quite a few local papers really excelled. And, pretty much every week you could hold us against the Independent or the Guardian, which were the two strong photo papers back then. We wouldn't do too badly because of the level of photography that we did. And as far as the level of stories that we did, usually every week we would make a story. We would do a story that would then, after we came out, the next day it would be in a national newspaper. And we'd sort of, get in touch and say we've got pictures and this is the story, and sort of, flog it onto the nationals. And so it was a great sort of middle ground of having the security of a staff job on a local paper, doing great work, and then getting national newspaper coverage after we'd published it sort of later. So
so we met briefly at the, what year are we? 2014 UK Press Photographer Guild Awards. They had a citizen photography section back when they were doing that.
Yeah.
I was on the table with yourself at then, and I remember you saying you sort of talked about the photos you took for the 7/7 bombings, and the particularly the famous one that most people have seen is the one where the woman has got the burn bandages on her, and she's being walked to the hospital by a man, I believe, isn't it? And that photo, I think, went all around the world. So what was that day like? And also, do you ever, when you're taking those photos as a photojournalist, you can't have in the mind as, should I take this? Does the moral side of taking a photo of someone at their worst point?
When I put a camera to my eye, and different photographers are slightly different in this, it's really interesting because I've read or spoken to some colleagues who almost treat the camera as a shield. If they've got it to their eye, it helps them pull back from the situation and not be as emotionally involved. Other colleagues, and this is my own personal philosophy as well, is if I'm looking at something through a viewfinder, I'm looking at it very intensely, and it's actually magnifying what's going on, and it affects me very deeply when I see moments that are traumatic for other people. So when Davinia Turrell started walking out with a burn face mask on, and Paul Dadge was helping her, that moment was the first moment that we realized what had actually happened underground, because it was one of these situations where, of course, we were overground. The police had got there and cordoned off the area, so could just about see the front of the station, but sort of side on, so you can actually see inside, but you could see people walking out. So there was no way of knowing what had actually happened. Back then, the call that I got from my picture editor was that there's been an electricity power surge, and the first one was in Aldgate, and I was driving towards Aldgate and then got a call saying there's been another power surge in Edgware Road. You're closer to that. Why don't you go there? And the second he said this, I knew this was a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Based on no facts other than in my entire 2 decades, I guess, back then of being a journalist, I'd ever seen one power surge. Never twice in the same day, let alone, you know. And I just remembered immediately the gut feeling was the same, and I remembered this visual of the second plane flying into the Twin Towers, and that feeling of deep despair deep in my gut was exactly the same feeling, and I knew that we'd been hit.
Yeah.
You know, so that was my feeling. So I drove to Edgware Road to photograph that. So up till that point, even though my gut told me one thing, it wasn't a fact. So the first wave of people that came out all looked visibly shaken. But they were fine. There was no visual clue to what had happened.
Yeah.
So these were kind of just passengers on either side of the carriages the carriage that exploded, or people who were just standing on the platform waiting for the next train. So they all came out looking shaken, but nothing apart from that. And then there was this lull, and then the first person to come out was Davinia, being helped by Paul. And it was the first moment that you realized that something truly terrible has happened. There was trickles of blood down her legs. She'd lost her shoes. Her white handbag was sooty from residue, I imagine, of the explosion. She was clearly very hurt because she had this face mask on and some burn gel on extremities, hands and stuff. And she needed the help of someone to steady her when she was walking. And as I watched her through my viewfinder, as I saw this moment, I completely froze. And it was probably in reality maybe a half-second hesitation, but it felt much longer. You know, time has a weird way of doing things when you're in the middle of something like that. And of course it was an image. It was my duty. I had to photograph this. People have to see what we've just gone through. And it's a twin area of responsibility, because what we do is we cover the news so we can show people what's happening, what's going on as a news story. But the same image then takes on a historical significance.
Yeah.
10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years later in books and online resources and so on, which then becomes part of the country's history, because history is good and bad, and hopefully humanity will reach a stage where we'll actually really learn from our mistakes as opposed to pretending we do and then making the same mistakes over and over again. So no, of course I sort of, after this moment of being completely shaken, I kind of switched into what my reason for being there is, and I started to work, and I started to make images, which conveyed what was happening, to then show other people. And this is the hard thing about being a photojournalist, is that despite of how you feel, you have a duty and you have to do that.
Yeah.
And that despite of how you feel actually is quite a broad spectrum. You know, this is one example of it, but you know, I've had to photograph far right leaders, you know, BNP and so on. And of course, personally, I absolutely hate their platform. These people should be jailed. You know, they're so completely off my own personal range of moral values and so on. but I would give them the same respect and same attention to photographing them as well and as honestly as I can as I would someone else who I might admire or adore or whatever, because that's what a photojournalist is. That's what a journalist is. You have to present the news as is.
Yeah.
And with photography, there's a visual flair, and the flair is to help communicate the mood or the story. So yeah, it's difficult. I mean, there's been other stories where I've point blank refused to do sort of stupid things that are celebrity led, and when you work, I've worked for a couple of tabloid newspapers over my career, not the ridiculously stupid ones. And you kind of, when there's trying to stitch up a celebrity just for the hell of stitching up a celebrity, and I've refused and got massive bollockings and, got into a huge amount of trouble. But, there is a line. It's not a case of anything goes, it's a job. No, because we're human beings at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But photographing something like the London bombings, this is a duty. It's horrendous, but it's something that absolutely has to be done properly and with respect and decency, because people have to know what went on, what happened.
See, I think there's I think the power of the photo is hard to beat a lot of the time to convey a story. So recent examples I can think of, there was the young child on the beach, the body of the young child on the beach. It's one of those photos, you see it and it just smacks you in the face. I think the photo would work better than a video of that, because it is that literal snap of time. Obviously, you go back to the Vietnam War, you have the young child running out from the napalm bombings, and those photos that stick with you. Do you think going forward we still, the journalistic photos will still be as important? Do you see the media still wanting those, or do you think we're moving away from that?
No, I think it's. I think the media will definitely still need still photographs, proper photographs, and that's got to do with the way the human psyche works. There's very, very few occasions, and even then you probably have to speak to journalists, not sort of regular public. There's very few occasions where a moving image, a video, has had more power or a longer lasting effect than a still photograph.
Yeah.
You mentioned the photograph of Kim Phuc taken by Nick running away from a napalmed village. This picture was the image that stopped the war.
Yeah.
How amazing is that? Nick, at the age of 17 or 18, took this picture and stopped millions of people dying. Brilliant.
Yeah.
One of my biggest honors was meeting both of them, because from the age of 16, when I started looking through books at the library, this is one of the things that immediately came up, and I was like, wow. And I had seen it before at school, and it had resonated, but then I really began to understand it. And the image of Aylan Kurdi, the poor child who drowned. This image changed Europe's stance on refugees, on the refugee crisis. The next day, David Cameron changed the stance of this country, and he put a limit, he massively raised the limit of refugees that we were going to take in. Germany just said, right, open everything.
Yeah.
Everybody come in. Because that's the human thing to do.
Yeah.
When this father's only option was to take his 2 children on this dinghy, because of a situation the West made, it's beyond just our responsibility to sort of take people in and to help them. And that's the power of the photograph. There's amazing TV footage of the Hindenburg disaster with the helium balloon that exploded. And the reason it works is the TV reporter was so human, he burst out into tears as he was...
Yes, the commentary on it was...
Yeah.
It sends chills, doesn't it, down your spine on that?
Absolutely. But then you see a still photograph, and it's equally, if not more powerful. of
Yes.
that. But it's only because of the chills caused by the commentator breaking down and being so human about it that it does that. So I think still photographs by far still have power, and it's just to do with the way we process stuff, because all through my career, or through the second part of my career, there's always been this thing of, oh, we want you to shoot video, you have to have a camcorder, and this is in the early days, when our cameras didn't shoot video, we had these stupid camcorders, which you couldn't really make anything with because they had no soul, it was kind of, very wide depth of field and very bad contrast, and you couldn't craft an image from this thing. And I just refused. Again, I got into so much trouble, but this isn't what I do. I'm a photographer, I need to make a still image that conveys a story, or a photo essay that conveys a story. Of course, this changed a little bit as time went on, and technology gave us tools where we could be expressive emotionally and visually. But yeah, still pictures are still by far the most powerful medium,
What are you shooting at the moment? What camera equipment are you using? Are you all Leica, I think, aren't you? Panasonic?
I've always liked small cameras. It's when I had my Nikon EM, this is the funniest thing. So 16-year-old kid, he's got a Nikon EM, and I was an avid reader of Amateur Photographer magazine, and they used to do a lot of interviews with press photographers. And, I was already interested in photojournalism, and these amazing photographers would talk about, you need to have two bodies. You need to have a long lens and a wide lens, and then, the second body is also a backup, I was like, I've only got one camera. I need a backup camera, but I didn't have another £150 to buy another Nikon EM. So anyway, one day in Amateur Photographer magazine, there was a review of a new camera that had just come out, and it was a Leica M6. And I didn't even know how to pronounce Leica. Is it Lysa? Leica? Never heard of it, And there was a life-size picture of it, sort of top, bottom, front, back. And I thought, oh, this is so small, seems quite good. Maybe this is a good backup camera to my bottom-of-the-range Nikon EM, So I read the review, and the reviewer was loving it, oh, it's so good, and the lens is great, and this. So I thought, great. This is the camera I'll buy as a backup to my Nikon. And then got to the end and saw it was, I think, about 1,200 quid or something at the time. And I was gobsmacked. And then I found that actually these are the best cameras, the best lenses, maybe not the best cameras, but the best lenses. And then realized that a lot of the Magnum photographers whose work I admired were using these cameras. So from the beginning of my career, I started shooting Leica. One of my father's friends was a very keen amateur photographer, and back in the day he'd bought himself a Leica M3, which was just in pristine condition, 1955. A beautiful Leica M3 made in 1955. He sort of brought it with him when he came to see my dad and said, I hear you're started as a photographer, so do you want to borrow this? And I was all over it, so I started shooting with this thing alongside my Canons at the time, and I loved it. That first roll of film I unraveled in the darkroom just to sort of check was so much crisper and contrastier and sharper, and I thought these lenses really do have something. So 2 years later, I bought my first my own Leica M camera, rangefinder camera, which was an M4 II. So all along my career, I've had Leica rangefinders alongside my SLRs from the early days, because these rangefinders are great for some things, but not everything.
Yeah.
And I like the small, inconspicuous, the fact that the viewfinder's on the corner, so it doesn't cover your whole face when you put it to your eye. It's easier to communicate with a sitter that way. Especially if you're working on a gentler story or something which is emotional. Your sitter can still see you and see your expression, and it helps tremendously. And of course, the quality of the lenses is beyond comparison. So apart from when there was a lull in the digital, when we switched to digital and Leica didn't have a digital solution, I've always had Leica M cameras. And just recently, a few months ago, I bought an M10D, which is brilliant because it's a digital rangefinder without a digital back. There's no LCD back. So on the back...
Oh, yes, I know the one you mean.
Yeah. On the back is just the on-off switch and exposure compensation. And it's brilliant because it's just like shooting film without the hassles of shooting film.
Yeah.
The hassles being having to get the film processed, then scanned in, and then put into your library, you know. So that's very cool. So I've always had Leica as a by-the-by when I've been on Nikon and Canon. And then after that I switched to Olympus Micro Four Thirds. And this is before the Leica M9 came out, even before the Leica M8 came out, because they made this pen, interchangeable lens camera, which was small and light, discreet. And I thought, this is great. So I started shooting with Micro Four Thirds right at the beginning of when it was launched. So that's 11 years ago now.
I'm a Micro Four Thirds shooter as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Olympus.
Brilliant. Yeah,
I do like them.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And I started shooting more and more with Olympus, and became one of their visionaries, and I'm one of the mentors now as well. But then I saw the Lumix G9, which is again Micro Four Thirds, so compatible lenses. And as soon as I held this camera, it took me right back to the first time I held a Nikon F100, which was a film SLR. And for me, that F100 was ergonomically perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And the G9 was identical. Everything just fell in the right place. And I started focusing with it, playing around with it, and it was quick and fast, and all the buttons were right. Everything just felt completely right. And I ended up getting one, and thought this is definitely the way forward. So then got another one, and now I'm shooting Lumix. I've still kept one or two Olympus lenses, and which are very good. That 75 1.8 is stunning. So I've still kept that, and but now I'm shooting Lumix, Lumix G9s, GX9. These are all Micro Four Thirds, and then the beginning of last year, Lumix launched their full frame camera, the S1 and S1R. And although I love Micro Four Thirds, there is the occasional need for full frame. It's about having the right tool. You know, sometimes you need a mallet, sometimes you need a jeweler's hammer, and it's about picking what works for you for that shot. And they asked me if I'd like to try it out. So I had a early pre-production S1, and it was exactly the same. The ergonomics was spot on. A little bit bigger than things from Sony, but all the Sony cameras, although very clever, were just always so uncomfortable to hold because the bodies were so tiny.
Yeah.
Sort of designed by a consumer electronics company as opposed to a photographic company, whereas the S1 just felt perfect. So I started shooting with it, and it was, you know, keeping in mind it's early pre-production, it was amazing. So I got involved. I started shooting a lot more, and they invited me to Barcelona to help launch it internationally. So now I'm shooting with an S1, S1R, couple of G9s, and a whole range of Leica DG Micro Four Thirds lenses, and the S Pro lenses for the S1.
What do you think is more important? Is it the body of the camera, or is it the glass that you put on the camera? If someone has a camera that's 3 years old, would you recommend they buy a new body, or would you recommend glass, the lenses?
It's not a very straightforward answer. Generally speaking, I would say lens. Invest in your lenses. Buy the best lenses you can get, or upgrade to the best lenses you can get as you sort of go forward on your journey. The only time the opposite might be true is if your camera body doesn't do something that you need it to do.
Yeah.
So, for example, if the focusing isn't up to par, or the drive is slower than you need, or if we go back a few years further back, it doesn't have Wi-Fi and now you want it to have Wi-Fi, or, you know, if there's something specifically missing, not something that you think you'd like, or something on paper sounds cool, but something that you actually feel like you need. Good, better face detection or eye detection, for example, stuff like that. Then the body's very important. But if you're making pictures with your camera and you're happy with them, just because there's a new version out doesn't mean you need to get it. But a better lens will help you make technically better pictures, or shoot in more challenging situations. For example, lower light. Or might have better focusing motors or whatever. So it's generally, I would say, spend more on your lenses, and also keep in mind that if you buy a pro specification lens, so if you buy an Olympus Pro lens or a Lumix Leica DG lens, these lenses are going to last you at least a decade of hard use. And I say hard use, I'm a news photographer, so although I look after my equipment, it's not sort of covered in cotton wool, because they're working tools for me. It's going to last you at least 10 years, realistically 20 years, if not much longer. Whereas in a 10-year period, you probably change cameras at least twice, I'd imagine. So invest in better lenses. That's the way forward. And although it's not exactly comparable, I've got a Leica lens that I shoot with, which was made in 1959. Yeah. It's 10 years older than I am, and it works perfectly well. It's got an aesthetic to it, so not as pin sharp as something newer, but it has this beautiful look, and it works. I've got Nikon lenses that are sort of from the 80s, which with adapters I can stick on anything and shoot with. So good glass is important. And actually, weirdly, it's not only good glass, or let's define good. Good isn't only technically perfect. This is one of the problems with the photography scene now, is you go onto blogs or read magazine comments and stuff, comments made on magazine articles, and this is much sharper in the micro contrast, and this is blah, blah. And it's like you're photographing a brick wall and comparing granules of dust, and who cares? Go and make an emotional picture. So a good lens could be something that actually isn't technically perfect. Some of the older Leica lenses, for example, or some of the older ingenue lenses, they have a feel and a look, and they can help create a mood, which is technically terrible. It's strong vignetting and blooming of light and blah, blah, blah. But, oh my God, when you look at that picture, it grabs you, So it's good. Good is how you interpret good, which isn't always technical.
So it's pixel peepers. Really annoy me when they're reviewing cameras or lenses or something, and it's like, I'm going to go down to the pixel, and you think, whoever does that, other than people that sit on internet forums or write reviews, if you're looking at a photo, for one, you're looking at it arm's length away. If it's on the wall, if you get really close to any picture, you'll see issues, but when you look at it from a distance, you don't. It's like, really annoys me. And I agree with pro lenses. I've got two, the 40-150 and the 12-40 pro lenses from Olympus, and they are the best lenses I've ever had.
Yeah, they're phenomenal. Both of those lenses are phenomenal. Yeah, the
40-150 is I love that lens. It's just such a nice feel of a lens as well. If you had the opportunity to photograph one thing that you've not done already, so one particular assignment or person or situation that you've not had the chance to yet, what would that be? Putting you on the spot for quite a deep question.
One immediate one that comes to mind is so I photographed President Obama twice on visits to Downing Street, but these were sort of arrival shots, when he came to Downing Street. But he's such a personable man that you still felt like it was a one-on-one session, because he would just find every photographer and make a connection. And I've never seen anyone who can do that. Weirdly, Margaret Thatcher came close to being able to do that, and two totally polar opposite type of people. But there's an art to be able to do that. But Obama really sort of did that too. to an extreme. So when I look at photographs shot by Pete Souza, who was his photographer, who was a White House photographer when Obama was in office, I'm so envious. I would love to have had that gig, and it's extremely hard work because you're working for 8 years non-stop. There's no weekends or nights off or anything like that. But just purely because of Obama's, what I perceive his character to be, and the depth of the man, and his family as well. I'd have loved to have photographed him properly. Been in the shoes of Pete Souza.
Edmond, thank you so much for joining us today. You're on social media, your website. Do you want to give us the details of how we can follow you and contact you on there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a joy to be on, and what a good conversation. It's sort of deep and enjoyable conversation. So thanks for that. I can be found just through my surname. It's pretty unique. So Terakopian, which is T for Tango, ERAKOPIAN. So at Terakopian on Twitter, at Terakopian on Instagram. My website is terakopian.com, and then through there you'll see links to my blog. And so on. So yeah, do keep in touch, and I post a lot of pictures and so on, and the odd review of gear and thoughts and stuff on my blog as well. So, but my website's well out of date, so don't judge me by the website. Look on Instagram or even Flickr is a better one. Yeah.
Edmond, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much to Edmond for agreeing to be on the podcast this episode. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I found it fascinating, really, really interesting. If you want to find out more about Edmond and his work, then you can find him on his website. It is terakopian.com. That's TERAKOPIAN.com. I will put the links in the description down below. Thank you so much for downloading this episode of the As Yet Unnamed podcast. If you want to follow us, then please click on the subscribe and follow button on your podcast app. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then click on subscribe. We release a new episode every Monday morning from 6 a.m. So once again, thank you so much for listening. I have been Ian Barstow, and you have been listening to the As Yet Unnamed podcast. Until the next episode, thank you and goodbye.